good. And we'll get started. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so how this is going to go today for those of you who are joining us, we've got all of our panelists, which we'll be introducing in just a moment. We would love to take your questions, but not during this first part of the session. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. And then when we start our open Q&A, I will pull questions from the chat box and then call on people. And at that point, you will be able to turn off your mute and turn off your stop video, turn those things back on, I guess I should say. And then you can ask your question at that time so that you can get a chance to see, we can see you and we can hear your question. So I will call on you probably about 6:15 or 6:30 is going to be when we start taking those questions. So again, use that chat box and then I will address those questions when we get to the Q&A. So hi everybody. My name is Erin Cronican, as you can maybe see on the screen. I'm the Executive Artistic Director of the Scene Place Theater. I'm calling in from New York City. I have a little bit of experience stage managing, but very little, only when I'm being asked to do so in a pinch. So I have a deep appreciation for what stage managers do from lacking those skills. We produce theater in New York City on what's called the Showcase Code, which is considered to be off-Broadway theater. But I have worked in major regional theater under LORT contracts. I've worked in off-Broadway here in New York. But we thought that we would start, I thought I would put together what I'm calling an indie stage manager roundtable, because I think that the skills that are necessary for people to work at this level are different than the skills that, of the stage managers who work at the larger levels. And from the people that I know and have worked with, I don't think they get celebrated as much as they deserve to be celebrated. And I think there's a lack of resource for people working at this level as well. I think that many of us, many stage managers, of course, and the same with actors, we're vying to get to a major place in our career where we're making the majority of our income through our art, and we're not wanting to stay at these lower levels, so therefore there are no resources for people at these lower levels. And so I'll be interested to see what happens in this conversation and see what you all say and what you share. So what I'll do first is I'm going to have everybody do introductions who are our panelists, and I'll go ahead and call on you so that you know when to speak there. So what I'll be asking them is their name, obviously, where they're calling in from, where you went to school. Did you go to school for stage management? Did you go with something else? I would love to know how you began your career as a stage manager. So what was your first show, or kind of anything, a short answer there. Do you have a side hustle outside of stage management? And if so, what is that? And also, if you wouldn't mind letting us know demographically how you identify in terms of race, gender, including your pronouns, LGBTQIA, and any other identifying information that you think makes a difference in your search for work, in your perspectives as you're working, and in terms of your feelings of inclusion while you're working. So we'll start with Fisher.
Hi there. My name is Fisher Bronner. I am calling in from LaGrange, Georgia, which is on the border of Alabama in southwestern Georgia. I started my stage management career 3 or 4 years ago, stage managing a pretty large charity event with the United Way of West Georgia. I am currently in school I'm going for English education with a minor in theater so that I can teach theater in Georgia public schools. That is my long-term goal, because stable paychecks and retirement. What were our other questions we were supposed to answer? Oh, Lord.
How did you, okay, so, do you have a side hustle outside of stage management?
I do have a side hustle. I currently do freelance education. So I teach supplementary arts education in Georgia public schools. So I do performing arts and technical theater education. As a freelance job, I contract out for a week and teach specialized skill sets in public schools that normal curriculum doesn't cover.
Cool. And where did you go to school, if you went to school, and what did you study?
I am currently at University of West Georgia studying English education with a minor in theater education.
Nice, wonderful. And how do you identify in terms of race, gender, LGBTQIA, or any other identifying demographics that make a difference for you as you're working in the field?
Well, I'm a white bisexual male, and that pretty much covers it.
Got it. All
Yeah.
right, Mel, we're ready for you.
You just call me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good here. Well, I guess you're getting the two Georgia people together. My name is Melvin Marsh. I am at the exact opposite end of the state as him because I'm in Augusta, Georgia. We earlier were saying he was calling from nowhere, Georgia. Well, basically same thing here. So that's where I am. Where did I go to school? I had an originally when I was applying out, was applying to schools that had stage management programs, but my husband or my fiance at the time couldn't get jobs anywhere where any of the stage management programs I had gotten accepted to were. So I ended up going to Emory University in Atlanta. I majored in biological anthropology. Second major was medieval Renaissance studies, and I minored in theater studies because trying to major in theater there was almost impossible. At the time, it required literally over twice the amount of hours that any other major required. Right. And they told me to break the computer if I majored in theater as well as everything else. I also then went off to University of North Dakota, earned a master's degree in astronomy, basically because I'm crazy. And I'm currently in graduate school for experimental psychology, and I'm going to be applying to PhD programs soon. So, how did you begin your career? So, in high school, as a lot of us probably did, I ended up accidentally getting a crush on the sound guy at my school, and so we started dating, and we ended up hanging out with, theater, and they were just trying to get me to do stuff, and I was like, nah. I didn't want to do anything, and they said, hey, my friend Kibble was normally the ASM, said, okay, Kibble can't ASM the show. Can you do that? And I said, huh? Assistant stage manager. What the hell is an assistant stage manager? And that was not the exact words I used, but that's basically what it was. And so I ended up at ASMing a multicultural thing. And within 2 years, I had gotten paid salaries to stage manage down in Florida. So thank you, Dino, somehow. I do have a side hustle. I'm, first of all, a graduate student. I'm a graduate assistant. I was teaching special education this entire year. I'm also a researcher. I used to have my own research business. I'm an EMT. Some of the people who've been on the various stage management groups know that I've been working EMS for a number of years. And I'm also own the #3 rated hypnotherapy business in the entire United States.
Oh.
So there's that. And how do I identify as mixed race. I know you probably can't tell it, but I am mixed race. Gay, female to male, transsexual, male pronouns. And I am a Jew by choice, which means I converted to Judaism, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, where none of this is acceptable. So there you go.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you're next.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Strauss. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as a lesbian. I'm also a Jubu, which is a Jewish Buddhist. I went to the University of Rhode Island, where I got my BFA in stage and production management. Before I was in theater, I actually studied sports management, which I'll get into when I talk about my side hustle. What else did you ask? Oh, how we started our career? So like Melvin said, I was in the pit orchestra in high school for a couple of years, but I didn't know what a stage manager was. I knew actors and director and crew and some tech, but didn't know the term stage manager. After being a sport management major, because I was been an athlete my entire life, studied sport marketing for a year in college, didn't really love working in that industry anymore. That summer I was figuring out if I even wanted to stay at that college I was at the time. My mom mentioned after we saw a Broadway show what a stage manager was, and I was like, that sounds interesting. Googled that and ended up changing my major and transferring to URI, where I remember doing View from the Bridge and some other shows as my first couple shows, Singing in the Rain. Then that summer I did a professional internship as an ASM at Theater 3, which is a regional theater on Long Island where I currently am. Then after that summer, I did a production management internship at Williamstown in Massachusetts. And then after I graduated from URI, I came back home, started working in New York City professionally in stage tech, in production management, and some writing. And for side hustles, going back to sport management, I have coached golf professionally in New York City and on Long Island. I still do some sport marketing if it is happening this summer, crossing all sanitized fingers. I will be doing some sport marketing for the US Open tennis in August. We'll find out in June if that is happening or not, if it's safe. And a new side hustle, I actually started real estate school before the quarantine. That is on hiatus, but as soon as it is safe again, I will be taking state tests to get my license to sell real estate in New York.
Great, thank you so much. Michael.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Michael Friedlander. I am calling from Los Angeles, California. I ended up graduating with a bachelor's in theater arts from Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. Before that, I was briefly an actor at the University of Hartford at the Hart School for about 3 semesters. I didn't specifically study, obviously, stage management, but theater arts in general, where I did take a class within that. I began my career through kind of just picking up and moving from the Midwest to New York City through a opportunity that a relative provided to work at an off-Broadway production as a PA. And then from there, another off-Broadway company, I hired a production assistant position, and then ultimately ended up at Surflight Theater, where I interned for an entire summer, and very luckily got my equity card from there and have never really looked back from the gig-to-gig operation. In terms of side hustle, my career has spanned at this point about a decade. I, over the course of that time, have been both privileged, lucky, and also had enormous amount of sacrifice where I didn't have a side hustle. I haven't had a day job. I haven't had anything else. I've dealt with constant on and off unemployment, like we all know about. I've gone from gig to gig, at times getting decent paying contracts to ended up smaller contracts and lower paying ones. There have been times where I've definitely tried or have thought about it, and actually am, because of all of this, seriously thinking about it now. But up until now, and over the past decade, it has just been stage management 100% of the time in terms of what my income has come from. In terms of, I am a white, cisgender, him pronouns, male, cis male, gay identifying, 33-year-old, and Jewish. I'm so interested about knowing more about Judaism and Buddhism. That's fascinating.
I can sidebar about that.
That would be awesome. And I think that covers everything you're looking for.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, Jordan, I pronounced your name incorrectly. I apologize.
No, that's cool. That's cool. It's Yurtis, like you're this. That's what I usually tell people at this point. But yeah, hello. My name is Yurtis Lynn Blanford. I am a straight white woman, she, her, yeah, I'm calling in from Ulster County, New York, where I'm super lucky to have escaped New York City and get to garden, which I'm hoping to be a new side hustle soon. Anyway, I went to City College of New York, CCNY, where I got a liberal arts BA and a minor in theater. I basically started stage managing by working with the drama club. We all just started to do our own work, and somebody was like, well, someone's got to stage manage. And I was like, okay, I'll try that. You know, I was one of these people who served in student council and that kind of jazz. So I figured, you know, you try to be organized. And I just really started to like it and ended up getting some of the main stage productions at City College. Lilias White came back to the city where she had gone and to basically direct Dreamgirls. So I got to do a really big musical at Aaron Davis Hall at City College. And it kind of just led to other work where there were some professors who also had connections to some pretty weird downtown theaters. So that was my first professional foray, was at Theater for the New City, which, if anyone knows, is, you know, still there, but it's a really wacky downtown venue. What else? Oh, side hustle. So I've had all sorts of bizarre side hustles, and my trajectory was like I came right out of undergrad to stage manage, but then I worked as an administrative director at a dance organization for like a long time, actually. And then once I went back to school and was looking for more administrative work, it wasn't really coming. And what ended up sort of responding to my inquiries was more production work. So I'm kind of back in it after having been out of it for a while. And the sad news about that is that back in the late 90s, I got my equity card, but then when I went to the other work, I really didn't think I was coming back to this work. So sadly, I let it go. But, you know, even when I had it, I wasn't really getting a lot of union work. I wasn't connected in that world so much. But anyway, that might be for later parts of the thing. I think I answered it all, yeah?
Yeah, that was great. Great. All right, Kate.
Great. Can everybody hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Kate Johnson. I'm currently based in Boston. Feel free to use whatever pronouns you like for me. I'm not particularly attached to gender, so I don't care. I got my BA in theater from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, with individual emphases on stage management and medieval studies. So that seems to be a common thing among stage managers. A handful of stage managers I've met have also been like, oh yeah, I also picked up a minor in medieval studies. I'm like, interesting. I've had a number of side hustles over the years, but never like consistently. So basically,
Speak up a little bit, Kate. Some people are having trouble hearing you.
Great. So I've had a handful of side hustles over the years. It's never been particularly consistent. Luckily, I've been able to get work. So like my first 3 years out of college, I just worked constantly. I kept getting stage management gigs that provided housing. So I wasn't really worried about paying rent. So that was great. And then I kind of ran out of gigs and went and worked retail for a couple of years. And while working retail, I still got calls to stage manage like one-off gigs in downtown Chicago. So I was like, hey, that works. So then I ended up booking a summer season at Shakespeare and Company and stayed there for 2.5 years. And then had more study work for like the next 2 years. And then ended up having to, I took a job in upstate New York, where there was a change in management happening. The artistic director was stepping down. There was a new artistic director coming in, and the new artistic director basically was like, listen, so I need you to stage manage the whole season next year. However, I can't pay you for the next 4 months. So you need a side hustle. So I'm like, great. So I moved to Bennington, Vermont, and worked retail there for a while. And then, he was true to his word. He set me up, and I was in upstate New York for 3 years, working consistently as the resident stage manager, production manager, and communications manager. Because why not do 3 jobs for the price of 1? It's fine. And so I did that for a while. And then my partner kept getting work in Boston. And I figured there's more work for me in Boston than there is for him in upstate New York. So I might as well go to Boston. So that's how I landed here. My current side hustle is walking dogs for a doggy daycare hotel and spa. But it's great because my boss is super groovy. She was a theater kid herself. And so I basically just get to say, hey, can we arrange for me to have a month off coming up? I want to take a show. And more often than not, it happens. So that's super great. I started stage managing by more or less having a book thrown to me backstage. I was working crew for a show, and the director comes in, and I had previously acted for this director. I was 17 working in a rental house, and the director comes backstage, and she's like, hey, so my stage manager had a bit of a breakdown. I need you to call the show tonight. And this was Wednesday of Tech Week. So, so I called the show, and at the end of it all, I had 8 calling notes. That was it, and it was a full-scale musical. Wow. So I was like, oh, this might be a thing. So I talked to my director and my tech director, and I'm like, hey, so senior year, can I stage manage as much as I can? And they're like, yeah, do all 4. And I'm like, okay, great. And then I went to college, like with the intent of being a stage manager. So that's kind of how I got my start. I'm currently enrolled in eCornell University to get a certificate in project management, thinking that may open up higher paying side hustles for me. I don't know, we'll see. And I have a very boring diversity card. I'm white, I'm female, and straight as far as I know, but if that ever changes, hey, whatever, that's cool.
Great, thank you, Kate. Mckenzie.
Hey, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm Mckenzie Mcguire. I am based in New York, but I'm calling in from my mom's house in New Jersey because, you know, I took off since I could. So I went to school for about 2 years at Marymount Manhattan College. I started as a scenic design major. I wanted to do producing and management and scenic design, but there was a mix up in the paperwork and I ended up just being scenic design. Spoiler alert, scenic design is not my thing. So I switched back to stage management, and I was a stage management major for 3 semesters, and then I had to leave college because a couple of different personal variables happened. So yeah, that was my training there. I'm now just about to finish animal behavior college for dog training, and then I plan on eventually going back to hopefully probably Hunter College or City College for theater again. I started my career as a stage manager, as a lot of people do in high school theater. My mom told me when I was 14 that I couldn't sit around all day and I had to participate in an extracurricular activity. So I showed up to stage crew one day and I never left. And then, so my side hustle is a weird situation. I had a side hustle and ended up falling in love with it. So it has turned less into a side hustle and more into a second career path, which is always a fun balancing act. But I do animal care, and I am hoping to become a dog trainer for rescue dogs. And then I identify as white, cisgender female, bisexual, and my pronouns are she and her.
Great, thank you, Mckenzie. Pat, we're ready for you.
Hi, my name is Pat Loeb. I am in Los Angeles. I am a proud equity stage manager. Let's see, what are your questions? Where I went to school. So I actually was pre-med. I went to the University of Pennsylvania and studied biochemistry, and also an independent major that I developed called the Biological and Sociological Aspects of Illness in American Society, which was a mouthful, but it has to do with the impact, the things people are talking about, the impact of where you live and what your neighborhood is like being a factor in illness and whether or not you report it and how you recover from it. and so forth and so on. I'm old enough that when I went to all my med school interviews, and I was interviewed everywhere I applied, they said, "Oh, honey, but you're a girl." And was waitlisted everywhere. And when I didn't get in, I went back to school to study secondary science education, and then my mom got really sick. And I came out to California. My friends had all said, you know, you went to a school where your work-study job was in theater. Why don't you see if you can make a living in theater because you love theater? I went, okay. And I got an MFA in performing arts at USC. Again, there was no stage management program there, but my work-study job was the assistant to the TD. So I got all this training. They didn't call it stage management, but all through high school and college, if they needed somebody backstage to run something, the Purim play needed someone to run the rheostat light board, whatever it was, I was the one they asked. And so I was starting to have a real acting career when I got hit by a car. And my stage manager that I was working on stage with, who knew that I was the person they could go, listen, and this was in a sign language theater company, a deaf theater company. And she would be like, Pat, so this particular actor didn't notice that the cupboard was open and we need it closed for the next scene. So when you cross the stage, can you justify blah, blah, blah. So that was kind of, she started really trusting me and asked me to be her ASM for several shows. I was thrust into stage management by accident and found out I love it. I do go back and forth sometimes because it's fun to go act in something and have no responsibilities, but and get to go home and don't have to be the first in, last out, don't have to have keys or write reports. But I do love stage managing. And so I started working as a stage manager and found that there were a lot of opportunities in non-mainstream theater that were open to bringing in women, that were open to everybody. And so I pretty much have done gay theater, Black theater, Latinx theater, Asian theater, you name it, bizarro installations, things like that. That's how but so my actual career began by accident, and I've been at it ever since. Really lucky because I had a little bit of background in that my University of Pennsylvania was the out-of-town tryout house for Joe Papp and Hal Prince and a bunch of other places. And part of my work-study job was in the space. So, you know, I'm so sad about Bernie Gersten because I met him when he was a stage manager for Joe Papp. And he went, oh, look, here's the booth, and this is what I do. And like, okay, cool. This is really cool. You get to play with all this stuff. My side hustle, I have directed and sung with and managed a Christmas caroling company for, how long have we been around? Since 1983. It's hella fun. Singers are very different. Like classical singers are very different than actors in many ways, and it's a lot of fun. I also have an EMT license. I've also been a professional game show tryout contestant when they're testing. My friends call me the queen of the odd job because it's so much fun to do things that aren't necessarily sitting in an office. So like, for example, we have a lot of game shows that test and they need people to play the contestant so they can try out hosts, they can try out how the point system works and things like that. And it's really fun to go in and just play trivia games for pay. How I identify similar, like, I don't know. I'm old enough that it doesn't make a lot of sense to me anymore. People call me, you know, what's her name? Or them or they or whatever. Because when I started stage management, you had to be genderless. You had to be one of the boys if you were female. If you showed the least bit of feminism, it was considered a weakness. If you wore makeup, if you wore a skirt, if you wore heels ever, even off-site, they didn't trust you. So I literally became one of the boys, which wasn't hard because I'd always been what we used to call a tomboy. And it never bothered me. I've never kind of identified as anything in particular. Like Elizabeth, I'm a Jubu.
Yeah.
Yay, Jubus. And I have found that, I'm just trying to see, I took some notes, but I work a lot with young people, with at-risk kids, with people who are deciding whether or not they like technical theater or backstage or anything like that. And I really love introducing not just all this wonderful stuff to people who haven't decided yet about options, but it's also really cool to remind kids about staying in high school and graduating, and if you're going to college, not just to take stage management classes, because every single show I've ever done has used every single thing I've ever learned: history, geography, sociology, psychology, on stage or off. And it just reinforced to me how having a background, having a background in languages, the fact that I speak a couple languages and sign, they've always come in handy. And it's always been just a really wonderful thing. And yes, I'm an equity stage manager. I also do events, conventions, opera, dance. In Los Angeles, you do what you can, which means you do everything. You can't just say, oh, there's a handful of people who are able to make their living as theater only people, but most of us do a little bit of everything. I've worked all over the Western region between film work, convention work. I did a shopping mall tour. It was literally a bus and truck between shopping malls, and we put up presentations in the center court, which is a whole different set of skills. And again, the only girl on the tour I tend to be an only, which makes it kind of interesting, but it also makes you really open to not putting yourself or anybody else in a box, and to looking at, like Freud said, seeing the world through different eyes, which is just really a profoundly good way to attack stage management, because you're looking at challenges not necessarily the way they've always been solved before. Mm-hmm. So, yay.
Thank you, Pat. Shannon.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I guess I identify as a white, straight, cisgender woman. I am calling in from Long Island. I primarily work in New York City or Long Island. I've kind of gone back and forth for the past few years. I went to school upstate New York, State University at Plattsburgh, and I have degrees in English literature and theater generally. So there was no stage management program at my school, so it consisted of just little things here and there. I kind of had experience from all over the place. How I got into stage management. Let me think. I went into college actually with only the literature major, and I decided to take theater courses to keep myself sane through all the writing and the literature, of course. I got very close with the faculty, eventually was asked to be on a tech crew, which was my job for 3.5 years in college. And by the end of college, I was stage managing all the main stage shows. I thought it was great. I love organizing things. That's just kind of my thing, like in and out of theater. I'm like the go-to person. I like to make everything organized and make sense. So when I graduated, my first non-college stage management job was actually with Erin at the Seeing Place Theater. So she's the person I have to thank for that.
You're welcome.
She's great. So it's Brandon. Everyone there was wonderful. So from there, I've done shows here and there. I worked for a company on Long Island full-time for a year. Decided to move on from that just to give myself an opportunity to branch out a little bit. But I have had the same side hustle for the past 3 years. I work as a standardized patient, an SP, for a hospital system. I see y'all nodding. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love it. Obviously right now I can't do it, so I've been working in I think now 7 different hospitals in the Queens, Long Island area, which is a totally different experience, of course. Hopefully we'll get back to theater in a safe way in the foreseeable future. But what is the other questions? Diving in there. I think I covered everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you did. Yeah. All right, wonderful. Thank you all for sharing that. I wanted to make sure that those that are listening and then you all, the panelists, have a sense of where you're different, but also there were so many nodding heads about what you have in common. And I think that that I imagine that for those listening, that there's a little bit of a feeling of solidarity, that no matter where you are in the country, there are people out there hustling just like they are, and have similar stories, so you can feel a little bonded in that way. So I would love to start with the questions that I have for you, those general questions. And for those of you who recently joined this call, what I would love for you to do is, when you have a question for the panel, to type it into the chat screen. And it can either be a specific question for a specific person or something open for everyone. Type it into the chat screen, and then probably around 6:30, I will open up as a Q&A. I'll go through those chats and I'll call on you to ask your question, at which time you will unmute and show your video so that everyone can see you. And then we'll kind of go from there. So please use the chat feature. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves through the chat feature as well. Okay, so first, I would love to know, for you all, what is some of the joy of working in independent theater? And when I say independent, what I really define it as is theater that's independent of major government funding. So not the big guys, and even not the major regional theaters, but some of the smaller theaters that are working on smaller equity contracts like letter of agreement or SPT, the small professional theater, or are in those major regional areas working on contracts that are for smaller theaters or codes. So the 99 seat agreement, the showcase code, any of the codes that are available in Chicago for the storefront theaters. What are some of the joys of working at those levels? And if you have a story or a funny anecdote that might go along with that, please feel free to answer to that or add that to your story. And anyone who wants to go.
Yeah, I guess first thing that came to mind with that was the biggest joy for me in working in, small independent theater has been like kind of learning to be a jack of all trades, and being able to hone new skills, because, sometimes there aren't the right amount, well, not the right, but there aren't the ideal amount of people in the production that you're working on. And so you learn to do a million different jobs, and some of them you don't like, and some of them you absolutely love. And a example that I immediately thought of when you said that was when I was working with the Steam Place, actually. And we had our light board go totally wacky on us, and the programmer was no longer in the country. I don't know, she was traveling somewhere, but that was how I learned to operate that specific light board, because I just jumped in and I improvised the show, and I now have, just from playing with that, figured out how to program. And my next show, I was actually able to go in as a stage manager and a programmer, which was awesome. So yeah, just the ability to kind of wear different hats while still stage managing.
Yeah, and I have to jump in there because it was a really crazy experience. The stage manager, as the lighting designer, did not save the show on the disc the way she thought she did. So when we booted the show after she left the country, our lighting plot wasn't there. So we had to open the show with lights in weird places. We figured it out, luckily, with Mckenzie's help, to try to identify which channels we could use that would actually light our show. It was a very dark set of shows, I think our first 2 shows, before we were able to get on the phone. And then Mckenzie, didn't you work with her remotely to get that fixed?
Yeah, I worked with her remotely, and so it was a combination of us working with her remotely and me and Brandon sitting in the booth going, "What does this button do?" And that's pretty much how we got that show figured out.
I've been in a lot of similar situations like that as well, where you just have to jump in the moment and wear a hat you might not be the most comfortable with. But at the end of the night, you're like, wow, I have a new skill and I can do this. And you can get paid for that gig on other productions. Sometimes the work can be more organic, working off-Broadway and off-Broadway, I feel. Where as we go to the bigger Broadway houses, sometimes the intimacy and honesty can be lost. I don't know if it's like a funny story, but I've had people come up to me in off-Broadway houses because they can see me in the booth asking if they can charge their cell phone, which is completely annoying. And I'm always like, no, you can't, and just pretend I'm not here. But yeah, that's happened to me a couple times off-Broadway where they can see me and they ask if they can charge their phones.
I would say probably my favorite thing about working is sort of to that point. I like that the work feels more personal and there's more room for you to express yourself as the artist, in my opinion. Like if you see something that's happening, for example, I was actually an actor in a show and it was a touring thing. We were taking it to a competition to SETC. And our goal for the show was to use like these curtain things for our walls. We had to have, it was 224 square foot of wall space, and we were going to use curtains and hang them up as our walls. And I didn't like that because I didn't like the idea. And because it was a smaller theater program, I was able to go in and say, hey, I had this idea, and sketch it out on a napkin and give it to a director. And I actually ended up being the set designer for that show because it was a smaller program and there was more freedom for us to put our ideas out there. And that's probably one of my favorite things, is just that freedom to say I have an idea and people listen to it.
Going along with
I
that.
would totally agree with that. Sorry. Go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, I was just going to say.
Because I was going to say.
You can go.
It's the Zoom 20 milliseconds delay. What I was going to add, because I totally agree with you, Fisher, is like you get to be sometimes more of a collaborator in a way. It also depends on, who your relationship with that director or the lead artist or the venue. But what I've found to be the most satisfying about working in this milieu is the boldness of the material. I end up working for a lot of more like performance artists, and I just love supporting the weirder, bold, kind of dangerous maybe material. It feels, especially as a daughter of visual artists, which I forgot to mention early on, I just feel like that's where I start to just feel like I come alive, and I love that.
Shannon, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, going along with Fisher and also a few other people, one of the biggest joys of working in independent theater for me is the ability to use your skills as an artist. And I remember that was the first thing I thought when working for the Seeing Plays, that it was great when looking to hire me, they were looking for someone with a broad theater background rather than just like a tech person. Because in independent theater, in my experience, no one show is the same. It's a little different every night, and the actors and artists and even the stage managers have that ability to play it by ear every night and make it a different experience. And so with that, with independent theater, you get more of a chance to be part of the whole process and be part of the show rather than someone just in the background, just pressing buttons. So I really love that. And just the fact that you get to know the cast more, get to know the artists more, everyone helping out in the lobby with ticketing and everything. It feels more like a family to me when I work in independent theater. And I guess with that, a funny story is, one of my favorite memories with my first show with the Seeing Plays, it was Carol Churchill's Cloud 9. And one of the actors had to be strapped into a corset every single show beforehand. So we got to know each other real well. I had to help him with that every single show, and it was always an experience. And needless to say, I'm not going to forget that show.
Yeah, one of the other things I want to mention, Gyrdis had said, I mean, we are as stage managers, we are creative problem solvers. Stuff happens and we have to figure out how to make it, you know, how to make it through, whether it's keeping the show running while a board crashes or stopping everything because, you know, there's another kind of problem. But what I love about independent theater is what you were talking about is the risks. Because the budgets are lower, because they don't have the money for a lot of stuff very often, they have to be more creative. And so the risks are bigger, and the opportunity to really come up with inventive solutions that work are so much broader. And there are fewer layers between me as the stage manager, not just in the actors, but also in the director and the designers and the producer. You know, we usually don't have a company manager. So it becomes a different line of protocol, and it becomes an opportunity to really be thinking out of the box, and to find the sorts of what ifs that nobody else maybe thought about. And that's one of the things that are really fun. Also doing non-traditional works, doing things that there isn't the big shows can't budget for, that are very risky shows, you know, shows that would not appeal to a broad audience. You know, the kind of ticket buyers that support the larger houses, but they can do on an intimate level. Those are the other things that I find really wonderful about independent theater.
To jump off that, so when this question was asked within our thing, one of the first things I thought, like, figuring out how to work, as Pat was mentioning, on a shoestring budget is, I think, one of the most interesting, fascinating, and joyous things. I think there's this saying, more money, more problems. And so sometimes that can really, you know, you have less people and less resources and less money, which makes almost the creativity bigger. And it forces everyone to figure out, okay, how do we make this happen with just the things lying around in our rehearsal space? We're not going to actually have a couch. We're going to have to use 3 chairs. We're not going to actually have a lamp. We have to come up with something that resembles it, as an example. So yeah, that to me, the creativity with a lack of resources can be the invigorating thing about it. I would say the second thing for me is also the fact that it seems like an independent theater, everyone has more of a desire to be there. Generally because people are not necessarily making as much money, generally because people have other things going on that, quite frankly, they, you know, from a side hustle perspective, they may not enjoy as much. They get to that rehearsal or that performance, and they just love being there, which just makes the experience of everyone so much better. As an anecdote, the thing that I really liked that somebody started off with talking about the fact that you become a jack of all trades and you learn things, especially as a stage manager, you know, when you're put into situations, is a benefit that I totally agree with. I didn't even think about it. Back when I was interning, I remember I was stage managing the children's shows out at Surflight Theater, and their audio engineer intern got mono, and I had to quickly learn what QLab was back in 2011 when very few people actually were using it at the time. So I literally sat down in the room that I was given by the theater and just started messing around with the program and learning how to operate it. And from there, what is kind of amazing is, like, gigs after gigs after that, I had the knowledge that other stage managers at that time did not. in a technology that was just starting to consistently get used, not only in performances, but in the rehearsal process, on how we don't have to say ring, ring, ring every time, and instead we can maybe press a space bar and not sound like a human sound machine. So yeah, those were my thoughts.
Cool. Mel, what you wanted to say something?
Yeah. So a lot of my things have now already been stated about the, the jack of all trades thing. That's what I really loved about all of that. To this day, the only things I haven't learned has been lights and sound. I have learned every other thing possible in there because that's how that happened. Every time I tried getting into lights and sound, the guy wouldn't teach anybody, and he had the only set of keys. I also appreciated the thing about, the fact that because it is usually a smaller group, you get to learn everybody's, weaknesses and strengths. And just like the puppy's strengths. So, in that way, it was the whole family situation that, I can't remember who said, somebody said that. Yeah, and also, this is probably going to come up as the challenge, but a few other people have already said this about the budget, budgets being pretty low. I like being creative and inventive. And that it does give, this allows me to do stuff because in the most of the companies I've been the one that's been able to come up with the crazy possible ideas, So I actually really, that is something I really enjoy doing, and you can't really always get that in a bigger show. Certainly the more expensive shows I've done, they were like, just keep to your role. I'm like, I can do that. You're not doing it in this show.
If I can, I love the part of theater that is the making a champagne dinner on a sink water budget. It's one of my favorite parts of it, and I love seeing the ideas that everybody comes up with. When you're sitting in a rehearsal hall and somebody says we need a lamp, and someone throws a textbook standing up on its side, and you're like, yes, that's perfect. And sometimes those crazy ideas will make it out on stage. Like someone will say we need a tablecloth, and so someone grabs a rug from downstairs, and it's tech week before you realize you've been using the same rug every day. And that's some of my favorite things. Like you can look at pictures from the show 10 years later and you're like, oh, I remember that ugly rug we used as a dining room set for 6 weeks while we were putting that together. It makes it feel a lot more close, and it makes the experiences much more memorable and far less cookie cutter.
And once in a while they show up on stage anyway.
Yes, you always keep them backstage just in case your real dinner table goes missing. You always have that dusty old rug in the back. That's just one of my favorite things about it.
Before we move on, Kate, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that it really instills a sense of community among the team. You really feel like you're part of a team when you're working in an independent theater. I've worked a couple shows now as an ASM for like a tier 2 opera company, and while the director has a say, it's really about fulfilling the artistic director's desire, fulfilling the producer's desire. It's about fulfilling the desires of all these people with all the money, all the people who have the backing funds. And while that's well and good, it does stifle creativity a bit. So at the level where you're not so concerned about, pleasing whoever's funding it, because man, everybody's on just a shoestring. I think it really brings a sense of community among the cast and the crew and the designers. You get FaceTime with everyone, and nobody ends up being, completely left out. Nobody's a mystery. You learn who each other are, and I think that's really great to have that kind of communal ownership of a production.
Elizabeth, you had something you wanted to share.
Yeah, something I just wanted to add about something I love about working in independent theaters, that I can touch the props and the set and the costumes, because if you're working on a Broadway production, you can't do that necessarily on your contract. So it's nice to be able to pitch in and do that, or just even move a set piece or set up a set piece or create a prop sometimes. And I also prefer working, at least I'm a New York City based stage manager, off Broadway and off of Broadway, because I prefer Brooklyn and the West Village and East Village and just that part of the world. I don't love Times Square in Midtown. Some people do. But when I work on shows in that part of the world, I'm always like, is it time to go home yet? You're not going to find me necessarily at the local watering hole in Midtown, but if I'm doing a show in Brooklyn or in the West Village, you'll definitely find me hanging out around there. It's just more authentic down there. So.
All right, so now the next question, and I expect that we'll probably have a lot of thoughts about this, but what are some of the challenges of working in independent theater? And I'll expand this question to include, what do you wish were about it? I imagine most people's response will be more pay, obviously, but what are some of the things that you've run into that just feel like this shouldn't be this way, and I wish we could address this? I, as a theater producer, would love to know, and I think that others might feel like, it's not just me, if they hear your experiences.
Well, one of the things I can absolutely say is that limitation on the numbers of bodies that are in support. I spend so many of my shows with nobody, just me, or with, I'll call them an ASM, but in fact, there's someone who is not, or doesn't know what an ASM is, or doesn't know upstage from downstage. Sometimes they're young up and coming, more and more they're young up and coming stage managers, but a lot of people who are there to be a body as opposed to be an ASM. But also it means show maintenance. For example, I did Tom, Dick, and Harry, which involves an actor hiding in a couch. And the set was built by someone who was, how can I politely put this, didn't understand that theater doesn't do the show once and then you break things down. So my ASM and my ASM and I brought in hammer and nails, and every night we had to repair the couch so that he could get into it the next night. And yes, it's not my job, and yes, I should have gotten, hazard pay or whatever for it, but the safety of my actors was paramount. And so one of the really big challenges is exactly that. In a small independent company, if something comes up at night and they're not in the office until tomorrow morning, you have to solve it. And even if it's not on your list of things you're supposed to be able to do. So yeah, more than one show, more often, but it creates what we affectionately called the when you're on the couch with the Tonight Show stories. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's a real it's also itinerant. It's also job to job. Sometimes you're making a living wage, and sometimes, a lot of the times, you're not on these small companies. And a lot of times as a stage manager, they don't know what it is we're supposed to do. So they don't appreciate what we do. And I don't mean I need to have people running around going, thank you, thank you, thank you. But when you take for granted that I'm supposed to scrub the toilets, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Definitely budget is a big thing. Because you don't always have everything at your disposal. You might not even have headsets or comm. I've done theater in basements where there's almost no cell reception, which is why if I have to go backstage and give someone their 10.5, the audience member will see me and ask if they can charge their cell phone because they see me hopping in and out. Something that's not related to budget, well, I guess it's related to budget, is if you're doing a showcase contract, actors can say to you, hey, I had an audition today, can I just not be here for rehearsal from, when to when, which can be trying, and depending on what you're doing that day in the role, you might really need them, or you can cover for them. I was doing a show in Brooklyn in a bar in the fall, and we had a lot of conflicts, and I had to read a ton of the lines, more than I've ever had to for a lot of these rehearsals. So we figured it out, and but you also have to sometimes put your foot down and say, we're getting closer to the tech, you're one of the principals, you have to be here. So it also depends on contracts, but showcases can be very tricky with that.
I'll add a couple of things on top of that. I would say, just to continue to add to the conversation, one of the biggest problems that I have personally had in a lot of the lower budget theaters I've worked in is people wearing multiple hats. I don't know, I doubt I'm the only one because I've come across a lot of them, but having the artistic director also be the actor, potentially the production manager being an actor, and someone else being a writer, I have dealt with it all. I've had to deal with a situation where I had to tell an artistic director, hey, you have hired a wardrobe person, let them do their job, and then basically got told I wasn't allowed to do mine and telling him to back off. In a lot of these companies, and I think this comes down to me to going back to the conversation about budget, I think a lot of the struggle that I've noticed overall thematically with smaller companies is there tends to be this gray line that on what kind of company they are that they tend to try to go back and forth on. And they want to kind of be everything and everything. They want to be a business that, you know, brings people in, but they also want to be a kind of community theater, we're really artsy type of organization. And there seems to be a lack at times on what's your business model? What are you truly after? And with that said, are we all on the same page of what that is? Because I think if you understand that, okay, this is more of a smaller organization that's not so much about making sure everyone gets paid or making sure that, you know, it's more about the art, or it's more about, you know, going in that direction, it changes those budgetary considerations. And then, you know, on top of that, going back to my initial point, ensuring that you don't create so many conflicts with taking on so many hats. As a stage manager, it really has been one of those things that I'm at the point after having gone through it enough that I just simply reject jobs when I notice that an artistic director is also maybe the director is also an actor in the show, or somebody related to that, to a management position is another role. And what happens, ironically, just to add one more aspect, there are times where the downfall of people taking on multiple hats doesn't, that downfall isn't what you think it will be. There was a show where the artistic director was an actor in the show, and I thought that that person would get into conflict with the director. Turned out to be great, turned out to be fine. Through the process, I actually ended up finding out that what I had lost was an artistic director to come in as an authoritative figure and say to the director, these are some things that need to happen with this show. Because of their concern about overriding the director and already knowing that that was a concern ahead of time. So there are just all kinds of complications with that as an issue. And then I think the second, you know, we all know the budget's a problem, but I think knowing what your company and what you're there to do, both as a stage manager, informing me of that when I walk in the door, so I know what I'm walking into and I know what everyone's about. Because if you're about, hey, we want to grow up, we want to become a business, this is what we want, or if you're just like, no, we want to get together and we want to do art. Those are two very different types of business models. Those are two types of theater. And I think depending on where you fall is the approach and your budget changes for that.
Be comfortable negotiating your contracts is a big thing, and don't be afraid to speak up. And if you really feel like they can't pay you or it's not worth your time, just don't do it. It's
yeah,
okay.
I think
feel confident saying, sorry, I was just gonna say, feel confident saying no to turning down jobs. I know for people who are in early stages of their careers, that can feel really scary. But once you do it a couple times, it'll feel okay, and you won't feel like there's this big weight, like, oh, why did I not do that? For economic reasons and financial, if you can't do it, it's okay. So just feel confident about that.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off of that, I've seen a lot of, especially being a young stage manager, I'm only 21. And there's kind of a general expectation of, you know, we don't have to pay you because you're opting to do small theater or you went into a financially unstable career. And so I see a lot of just this expectation that people are going to take jobs because, you know, we'll pay you an experience, it'll go on your resume, it'll look good, whatever. And my rule, I mean, I personally, I'm willing to work for not much, but I don't work for free. And that makes a lot of people very, very upset. And I kind of wish, that's a big challenge I've noticed working in independent theater, is there's this expectation that it's okay to just not pay somebody for their labor.
which has been challenging for sure.
I'd like to speak on the young thing. I'm also young. I'm 18. I started stage managing adults when I was 15.
Yeah.
And the fact that I was young has always been a factor. I directed my first show completely by myself when I was 17, and my competency has come into question multiple times because of my age. And I feel like that's something that's common because it is a smaller group, and with that intimacy with the people also comes a clickiness with the people, where it can be hard to break through into some of these community scenes, and it can be hard to really prove yourself, especially if you are young going into it, because there's that perceived young equals incompetent. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at, because a lot of times it's our younger people that'll catch on to the Q labs faster and will pick up the lighting stuff or have those creative out of the box ideas, because they don't have a way they were taught to do it. They have a way they want to do it, but they were never taught to do it anyway, so they'll have that fresh perspective. And I think that's something that's really important.
I just want to say
And
it's
I
true
wanna
in
just-
reverse too. That when working with a whole large group of young people as an older stage manager, the reverse happens too.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Pat. And I also want to say that it's kind of connected to the budget scenario, but the schedule is always fakakta, right? Like for two reasons. Generally, you never have enough time for tech, and there's an expectation, even if you've had like a 3-week rehearsal process, that me as a stage manager, I should get that like boom immediately. And where's my tech time to actually have the time to do it right? And to, and there's some situations where I'm not in a long part of the rehearsal process. They bring you in a little bit later because of the budget.
Yeah.
And so having enough tech time is really critical. And then also having enough of a long run. Like in small scenarios, people think that if you have 3 weeks, you have this huge run, right? Like it's crazy. And it's too bad, because usually you get to like that second week, maybe you're really in a groove, and then boom, it's over. Everybody's worked so hard, and then bye-bye. I have a couple situations where I'm lucky enough to have taken a show that I started at La Mama, and then we got a chance to go to Red Cat with it or something like that. And then you have like an arc of time that you've worked on something. But that, again, for me, has always been about a good relationship with the artist.
Yeah, that's true. I've definitely been on shows before where I'm like, oh, this is over already. I feel like we were just getting to the peak. But then I've also been on shows where I'm like, is this not over yet? So I feel like there can be definitely a big challenge, especially in smaller theater, of getting that run just right.
So with, as far as my challenges were a lot of budgetary. Some people made comments about no crew. Most of the times I've ever stage managed, I have never had an ASM. There have been a few times where I thought I had a crew. I'd find out opening night that the director, for whatever reason, fired my crew. And we had multiple scene changes. That was a lot of fun. They also told me the actors couldn't move anything. So I had to do everything alone. And luckily some actors actually took pity on me and helped me move the set. Luckily I was also calling from the wings too, but the lighting person wasn't thrown. Another thing that I've had is that, I have never worked a theater that had any type of computerized anything. So everybody's talking about these theater, these theaters, these apps, and I'm sitting here going, excuse me, what's this? Which means since I never have these skills, that means I can't go on to do other things. So it's been, that's been hugely problematic for me, and also whilst in certain situations, doing new, innovative theater would be great. I was in things so small they didn't even get new shows to do, so we were always stuck doing things that were older. But the fact is that if we have a budget of $100, which would be the entire show's budget, that would also have to include the royalties. That was the props, that was everything else. So I kind of envy anybody who's actually gotten a decent amount of money. And if we want to talk about people who aren't paying younger stage managers, I made more money as a stage manager at the age of 17 than I have ever since. So my pay has actually gone down. I also, but I worked several years professionally from then, and then had to take a big gap, and then coming back. But I was still, I was paid more as a 17-year-old stage manager. So it's not always an age.
Just going off Melvin's, he talked about how he hasn't, he pronouns, correct? I just wanted to make sure. He hasn't worked with many apps. Don't take that for granted. Starting out in college and professionally starting out, I did work at a lot of theaters where we had QLab and high-tech light boards available. And then I did a one-person show when I was 22 or 23, something like that, where they gave me a manual light board and I didn't even know it was a light board. Because I was like, what is this?
It
wasn't just like
on a manual light board because that was the only thing I was never shown how to do, because that particular lighting person would only ever do lights, would never learn anything else, and was very protective. He ended up going into community theater, breaking his back. Now he can't do theater at all anymore because this was his set. It's like, well, I guess you should have been backstage with us. We could have taught you stuff. But I've never even done that. I've never had anything that had a computer or not even, let's not talk about apps. I didn't know apps were a thing for stage management for until about a couple months ago.
Well, what I was saying is that I'm grateful that I had that experience, because they threw me and said, no, you got to run the board this way on this manual. It's like being a DJ almost, especially there were a ton of lights, and I was also running the key lab for that show and video. So as scary as it was being like, okay, well, I might be 3 seconds behind a cue and it might not go for it. I'm just got to do this. I ended up having to use manual light boards for several productions later on in my career. So to have that experience and not being able to rely on as much modern technology is great. So don't be afraid of the old school stuff, but also don't be afraid of the new school stuff. It's
but unfortunately, I see a lot of lighting jobs, or a lot of the little stage management jobs say, can you please have blank, blank, and blank? And I'm sitting going, what's blank, blank, and blank? Thank God for the tech week stuff, the tech stuff that they're doing on Fridays. Or else I'd be still sitting. I have no idea what these things are. Thanks, Matt.
I want to bring up one other thing that hasn't been raised, and I'm sorry for jumping back in, but the other thing about the small independent shows is that they tend to have their way of doing things, and they tend to assume everybody does it the same way, and they tend to assume you're going to know. And I think all of us have probably gotten in trouble with that at one point or another, but it's always interesting to say, to go into a place cold and not know their version of their protocol.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to acknowledge your questions are amazing, so thank you. Please keep them coming. We'll get to them pretty soon. So I'm wondering, I want to just skip ahead a little bit in our list of questions that you all have. How do you all promote yourselves? What do you do to get that work that maybe is at that next level? So that those of you who are all looking, who are listening and wondering how to get those jobs, what's worked for you all?
I have something that I cannot stress enough. Whenever I talk to, especially like early career people, and they want to know, the first thing I always say is talk to everyone. If you're coming out of in a smaller theater, a lot of times we'll have those situations where we're going out into the lobby to meet people, or we're after the show and there are people hanging around. If you see someone chilling around in the corner in a nice outfit, talk to them. Worst case scenario, you talk to a first-time actor's parent and it makes their day that you got to tell them how great their relative did. You know, talk to everyone, because you never know who an artistic director or a producer or a talent scout, or you never know who's hiring. So I would just say talk to everyone, because those opportunities, you never know when they're coming, but when they're there, you don't want to miss them.
Yeah, kind of riding off of that, I was working a show at one point and they said they were doing some sort of award ceremony, and they said, oh, you know, an extra $50, will you just come in on Sunday and, you know, run the light board for this award ceremony, and afterwards we're doing a little like get together party thing. And I was like, yeah, sure. I go in, I run the light board, they're doing the party thing, and the producer of the show that I was working comes up to me and she's like, oh, you know, come grab some food, whatever. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I am a stage manager. I like to be in my little black hole and not talk to people. But I sucked it up and I went out there anyways, and I ended up getting my next gig for a director who was looking for a stage manager. And that type of stuff happens all the time, you know, just as a the Seeing Place was my first like professional gig, whatever you define professional as. And from that, I can count 4 different jobs that I've gotten from connections that were rooted in my first job, just from talking to people.
I would totally really important sorry to be afraid to apply for jobs that you think are, too advanced for you. If you think you don't have the experience for something, apply for the job anyway, because that's how I ended up getting my AGMA card and ended up becoming an AGMA ASM, is that I saw a posting for, an opera stage manager. And I'm like, well, I've done a handful, but never at this level. I might as well apply. Ended up having an amazing conversation with the production manager, who was like, yeah, you're right. You're not ready for this, but hey, we need an ASM. So even something like that, just overreaching if you can, and just sell yourself as good as you can to whoever it is that you're going to talk to, because it may land you a job that isn't the goal, but is still damn decent pay.
I think marketing yourself, just knowing how to phrase the things that you've done in a way, like in a professional way, it makes it so much easier for you to get yourself out there. Coming at something rather than saying, oh, I've stage managed a couple of shows, having those, I stage managed this show at this place, and being able to just know those things when they're asked of you, that goes a long way. And being able to know right off what you can and can't do, and getting yourself in those positions where you're confident to do what you're doing, it helps a lot, just knowing what you know. And making sure you're confident going into everything.
Have business cards on you.
I would also, yes, yeah, Elizabeth, yeah, right on.
I was gonna say, I always keep business cards in my wallet. Also, if there's a specific theater or a specific person you want to work with, leave a letter for them at the stage door, or get a hold of their email address from the company. You really gotta get your way in there and be a shark kind of, and network very hard and streamline past everyone. On SM drink nights, social media is a big part of it. I have a website. Some people don't do websites, but if you can't afford to make a website, do that. And just put yourself out there, and know that you just can't wear one hat. So I actually did a show with Yurtis a couple years ago, a Christmas show, where we were hired as stage managers, but we went in and things change, because a lot of corporate events that happens, any kind of event or theater, it can just happen things change on the fly. And she said to me, do you know sound? And I said, yeah, I know sound really well. And she's like, you're going to be the sound manager for this event. So I ended up sitting in the booth with the sound people and giving them their cues. And,
and what was so great about that, Liz, was that like you quickly just went from being off right to just boom, running the sound, and it was a great example of like, there was no drama, but that's not what I was first here for. You just boom, went, did it, and I knew I didn't have to worry about anything. It was perfect. And I'm just gonna add one thing, which is that I've mostly gotten my work from working and having people in the audience or coming to an open rehearsal and then coming up to me afterwards and being like, I mean, that's how I got I do a lot of dance, and I ended up doing a bunch of touring with a small ballet company because the executive director of that company came to an open rehearsal that I was doing with someone that she follows and supports, and I got a lot of work from it, and it was fabulous because I didn't audition for that job, right? I didn't have to like struggle for that job. That person saw me doing what I was doing, and I was highly complimented as well. It just made me feel like, work can beget work. And never, and definitely talk to people, I've also gone to events where I then went up to the artist who I might have seen before or whatever, and then they're asking me what I've done, just like Mckenzie was saying. Like, you're at an event and you try to just break out of your shell a bit and you can get gigs.
Yeah, networking is the biggest key to this. You just,
Yeah.
you gotta be, you can't be shy. I mean, I used to be very shy when I was 18 or 19. And then as I started working more and more, I'm like, I can't be shy anymore. I just got to shed that shell and just be confident. It's definitely a muscle you got to keep working, but it'll get easier and easier.
Ambition is healthy.
Something I also got a lot out of, especially living in New York in recent years. I try to go to Broadway shows if I have extra money. You know, I stage door, or not stage door. Oh, what's the word?
Drop a
I forget it, but I get cheap shows when I can. And something that I've actually gotten a lot out of is when I go to a Broadway, off Broadway, off Broadway, whatever, any sort of professional production, is stage dooring after. Not only, you know, is it fun to meet the actors and talk to people, but also usually the people who are stage dooring are other theater people. And so while you're waiting for the actors to come out and, you know, sign the playbills and everything, you end up actually talking to other theater people and meeting other theater people. And I've met a couple of directors who now have my contacts because they just say, oh, another theater person, oh, I'm looking for a stage manager. So I've actually gotten a lot out of that as well, just kind of stage dooring specifically, but also just hanging out where other theater people hang out.
So just to provide a slightly different perspective, at least, or opinion, while I don't disagree with that, with networking and everything that everyone is saying, something that I've seen on the opposite end are stage managers who network too hardcore, to the detriment of actually doing the job. And I think we've all worked with those, I would imagine. People who are more interested in being friends with the actors, people who are more interested in buddying up with the artistic director or the director. My personal advice and my personal experience, and honestly for me, what has made my career is by focusing on doing the job and on focusing on the job. And by focusing on doing the job to the best of your ability and making sure you're doing that, which is an massive, all-encompassing job with a lot of complications and issues, people notice that, even down to an actor who you're not best friends with, but who says, you're a good stage manager, and I have a company that I've started. Hey, would you mind stage managing for us as well, as just one example? Or, you know, I'm an artistic director for this. So sometimes, similar to the work begets work situation, by entering a job and not necessarily looking for your next job, but just focusing on doing the job will assist you in getting the next job.
Absolutely.
I see something about that because I took a big gap from theater. I ended up as a graduate assistant, but somebody was a big, I was working with developmentally disabled people. One person wanted to go take a stagecraft class, and I agreed to be the person to go with that. I ended up networking with the professor when he found out because he only apparently liked people with theater backgrounds, and he was a tech theater person. He was like mostly lighting. And I said, you know, I do have this background, because I wanted to make sure he didn't hate me immediately. And as we were walking, he was like, oh, well, what did you do when you were doing this all those years ago? I said, actually, I was mostly stage management. And he was like, oh, huh, I may eventually have something for you. Now, he did eventually get me a position at a show in fall. So, you know, I totally agree with you trying to get one job to do the other. I'm otherwise a horrible networker. I have tried talking to everybody, and it usually doesn't work. But once people give me a clue of, you need to talk to so-and-so, I will send them an email, send them a text, send them whatever. So that's, you know, I can kind of do that. Otherwise, I'm a horrible networker.
I think a lot of us feel that way. And I think I've heard a lot of stage managers talk about that too. Like Mckenzie said, I'm in the background here. I want to be in my bubble. I want to be in my booth. So I want to go ahead. We have a lot of questions, so I want to try to get to them. And to try to get everyone's question out there, what I'm going to do are two things. So one, the question that say for all, I'm going to go ahead and pick someone to start with and get that question answered. Then we'll move on to the next question and the next question and the next question. That way everything can be covered. If things aren't covered or there are more questions, what I'd love to do is invite everyone, if you haven't already, please on Facebook, join the Year of the Stage Manager 2020 group. what I'll do is I'll post the questions on there and allow for an open conversation that can continue beyond this call, because we're already at 6:30 and I have so many of my own questions that I wanted to add that there's no way we're gonna get to all of them and respect the 2 hours that we have. So I think that'll be a good compromise so that everything gets covered. So the first question is from Laura Crawford. So Laura, why don't you unmute and turn on your video so that you can ask your question about working at indie theater.
Howdy. So let me scroll back up and see exactly what I wrote here. So having worked, like I started in smaller theaters and have just been sort of moving towards bigger, but I wondered, what do you guys think, like how has working in independent theater benefited your work as you moved into larger theaters and maybe vice versa?
So Michael, I would love for you to take this.
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to what someone mentioned regarding a little bit of jack of all trades. Going from smaller institutions allows you to learn certain technical things and certain things in general that you can take with you to the bigger, so that when you go to bigger and you're not allowed to touch that thing, or when you have a conversation with crew about something, you're already aware of that knowledge and can kind of communicate what is needed, because you're kind of more at the smaller theater, getting down and dirty and in the trenches with making theater happen. So the transition between some of those bigger, you already like, as one example, you know, in an interview, if you've worked in a situation, even if it's a small theater where automation was used and you have an interview for a larger theater, you can mention the fact, hey, I've worked with automation before. I understand the technical aspects of this because I was potentially operating it randomly, even though you should not be operating it, as a sidebar. But, you know, I think that helps with that transition. In going from smaller to larger. When I'll throw this out there. I have had the opportunity to work in both. And I noticed that, I have personally noticed it is more of a struggle for stage managers as a whole to go from larger to smaller than smaller to larger. I've been in smaller theatrical situations where somebody got hired who more has a career as a Broadway or large format theater. And there's not, they get jolted in terms of understanding you don't have just amazing amounts of office supplies at your disposal. You don't have an incredible amount of PAs and SMs available to do whatever you need. You actually have to be the one to do it. And there tends to be a lack of recognition that there's a different amount of work that occurs at larger theaters. It's generally more people oriented, and what gets replaced with that at smaller theaters tends to be more physical, manual type of work, which is doing it yourself. I would say one great example of this that I hope all stage managers understand as they move. On a smaller scale, if you're the PSM, do not necessarily toss all of the reports and schedules and, you know, to your ASM. That is a Broadway mentality. Broadway PSMs have, you know, their ASM, they are more of like literally upper management, and Broadway SMs and ASMs are the ones putting together the reports, potentially running rehearsals, focusing more on the documentation. When you transfer to something at a lower scale, the duties between, if you are lucky enough to have multiple SMs, is more equally split. You both are sharing responsibilities, putting in the work, and there's generally a division that provides in terms of how that lines up. That would be hopefully an answer to your question.
Thank you, Laura. Would you mind turning off your video now, and I will go on to the next question. I appreciate it. So the next question was by Ivy Stevens, and I know originally you wanted to direct this to Michael, but I think it would be wonderful to hear from Pat on this question. So if you can turn on your video and turn on your sound if you're still here. And yay, hooray.
I'm also scrolling up to find exactly what I said.
Yeah, it was at 5:56 if you find it in the time stamp.
Got it, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, you guys were talking about the sort of joy of a shoestring budget and that allowing for more creativity, and then talking about all the budgetary constraints of being on a smaller theater. I was just wondering sort of where your balance line for that is. Like, is there a point at which, is there a kind of contract that you won't accept because the money doesn't outweigh the amount of work that you're going to put in? How do you make sure that you have enough contracts in order to live? How do you balance that with your side hustle? Sort of that entire question.
It's a challenge. How do I address this? I take shows for a variety of reasons, and not all of them are money. There are passion projects, and I know that I'm going to have trouble making my bills, but it's an important piece, or it's a director that I love to work with, or the topic is something that speaks to me. And I will make compromises for that. I make a lot because I have a Christmas caroling company, and because I have 60 singers who depend on me for work. I don't do Christmas Carol, Nutcracker, all those things. And those are big money jobs that come in every year. I had an opportunity to work with the Rockettes and turned it down because I have 60 people who are dependent on me for work during the month of December. So yes, it's lovely to be able to make your nut. And being a Jew boo, I stress the boo part and make it happen. But I also do those side hustles because of that. And yes, it would be so lovely to be able to completely make my living in theater. Sometimes I can, like Michael said, bounce between larger stuff and smaller stuff, bounce between things that are not traditional theater, but stage management work. Sorry, I didn't get a chance to turn off my notifications. It's like ding. I think that it has to do with your personal priorities. I am willing to live on a shoestring, and heaven knows I know how to do it. I know how to pretty much live on no income and somehow manifest the food I need and the bills to be paid and all that. And I know not everybody does. So it's you deciding what your priorities are. If your priority is the income aspect, then you better be the very best at what you do, because there's a tremendous number of very talented people who are looking for the most important thing as being paid. But if you have in your heart the and I don't disagree with them, and they're wonderful human beings, and I respect them. And I also know a lot of people who do theater for love, or who do crazy, crazy things in order to open people's minds in ways that they haven't. And those kinds of passion projects speak to my heart. And so those are the kinds of places where, like, there's a benefit I do every year as a stage manager. I volunteer my time because the person who's in charge of that particular theater is committed to local plays, is committed to non-all-white casts, is committed to telling the stories that other people don't tell. And in a variety of ways and shapes and sizes, and some of them are great and some of them are not ready yet, but that's his commitment. So when he has his benefit, has his fundraiser, I volunteer, as do some of the best talents in Los Angeles. And when I go home, I walk home with food for 2 weeks that I get to put in my freezer. And I walk home with the appreciation of people who know that I'm donating my time to a worthwhile cause. I also have several directors that I will no longer work with no matter how much you pay me, because I've been paid very well to work with them. And they are so abusive and destructive to the artists, to the actors, to the designers, to me. They have to take out their anger somewhere, and because they're in theater, they think that gives them permission to express all of that in a direction. So I've had opportunities to get paid a buttload of money for people that I say no to because I don't want to work for them. So you have to find your own balancing act. Yes, a side hustle is a wonderful thing. And if you have an area that you're passionate about, developing that is not a bad thing. And learning how to live on a budget is really important. And that's part of why, you know, I can be very valuable in my little tiny, with the little tiny houses where they are paying you something. But I know how to go to my local 99-cent store and make silk purses out of sow's ears at 99 cents. So that's also a skill set. So you have to decide for yourself what your priorities are. And once you do, you have to fully commit to that, and you will find that that particular living will manifest. I don't know if that answers your questions or frustrates you more.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ivy. If you wouldn't mind turning off your video now. The next question is from Michelle Levinson. If you want to scroll up to your question, which happened at 6 o'clock. I would love to direct this toward Kate.
Hello. Hi. Sorry, just got here. Just got to the question, I mean. So mine is basically, everybody seemed to talk about learning from about a lot of different roles in theater, especially doing smaller houses, smaller companies. And I come from I'm in undergrad, I'm finishing this week, and I've kind of dipped my toe in a lot of different spaces, even though I am primarily a stage manager. So I guess my question is primarily focusing on, do you ever feel like because you are learning all these multiple aspects that you get taken advantage of, or you are hired for one job and end up doing 3, but it doesn't feel worth it?
Sure. I do not know how to use a sewing machine. And this is a very deliberate decision. I am good with light boards, and therefore I end up programming occasionally. I'm good with sound, and therefore I ended up learning QLab one time for a show because we didn't have the budget for a sound guy or sound person. That was very normative. I was willing to learn sound because it was still just going to be spacebar, lights go, you know, everything's great. And you know, as far as prop design goes, I've had to pull props from the basement because that was just built in to the stage management job at a certain company I was with. So when you have all of these things, and you're able to kind of like make miracles happen on a daily basis, the big trick is to make sure that being a miracle worker is not where the expected standards are. So it's really important to be like, hey, sure, I was able to do this, but you need to understand this is how many hours it took, or this is how much money it cost me, or I need to be reimbursed for this, or you cost me X amount of time, so can I maybe not come in on Monday? So when I was wearing the hat of being resident stage manager and production manager and marketing and communications, part of it, and I will give my artistic director, who was also the general manager, I give him mad credit for this. I pretty much made my own schedule based on how much work I did. So, for instance, we had a carnival of new work that an intern student stage manager was supposed to be running. And this is managing 80 actors, but they're all 10-minute one acts. So, yes, it seems like a lot, but also it shouldn't be that hard because the set is knowing how many chairs go out per show. Like, this is not a particularly challenging situation. It's metal chairs and one acting cube, and that was the set. And she kept melting down, and there was no amount of, you know, fostering any kind of learning that I could do, that the artistic director could do, that any of the directors could do to prevent her from melting down. So I just had to step in and do the whole thing. Which also meant that I had like 2 70-hour work weeks back to back. And at the end of that, I'm like, you know what? we don't have anything that's pressing this week. Nothing that I'm doing can't be put off till next week. I'm taking a whole week off. And I basically just had to have the gumption to go up and say, I need time off because I worked a ridiculous amount of overtime. You don't pay me for overtime. So I'm taking a vacation. And sometimes you just have to be that bold and assert yourself to make sure that if you are getting taken advantage of, it's in a way that is okay with you and okay with your decisions. If it had been for a different director, if it had been with a different company, I absolutely would have left. But because I had a very good relationship and felt a very good sense of community with this whole company, I was like, okay, it's worth it. Does that answer?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you so much.
Great.
Sorry, thank you so much for the question and for the answer, Kate. This next question, I'm sure everyone has probably dealt with this, but I don't know for certain. So rather than name someone to answer it, I'll just take the first person who has not yet answered a question. So no Michael, Pat, or Kate, but for the rest of you, Diane Harkavecchio, if I pronounced your name correctly, if you're still with us, would you mind turning on your video and your sound and ask your wonderful question about hostile environments?
Hi everyone. Sorry, I looked quite a few questions there. I'm from South Africa. I think I'm the only one from South Africa here, so
And this
I've got a few questions.
6:05.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know what your time will say.
Yeah, no, that was about 12 o'clock a.m. my time.
Okay.
So basically my question is hostile environment. I've worked on a few shows either as ASM or SM, and the person above me, like the SM or the PSM, would be extremely hostile towards me. I recently worked on a show which I was on tour with, so I was in China for 3 months, and I was a deputy stage manager and ASM basically. But the stage manager, in a way, kept on comparing me to the previous ASM and telling me that I need to do it the way she did. And it got to a point of a frustration building up that she started screaming at me because I was not doing stuff the way she's used to doing it. And basically my question is, I know we should adapt, but if I've got a way of doing things that makes it easier for me with props and stuff, should I then follow my way or, yeah?
I've actually worked, last year I do a lot of one-person shows in New York. And I was doing a one-person show where the actor became very hostile towards me. He actually put his hands on me, so I quit the show because that was last straw. If you put your hands on me and you scream in my face, I will walk out the door. That is the only time that has ever happened. If you feel unsafe in a situation, leave, regardless of money. Your safety is first and foremost the most important thing. And this actor kept comparing me to the previous stage manager he had hired. He said, oh, they did it this way. And I'm like, we're going to get, you try to talk them down and say, well, this is the new version of the show. We're doing it in this space. We have to adapt to the environment. Communication is obviously the most important part of our jobs. But if you just can't communicate with the people you're working with safely and efficiently, and you feel like mentally, emotionally, physically, you can't handle it, just leave. I literally walked out of the theater and he couldn't believe it. He did pay me because I sent him a letter and the theater saying, I have a contract, this is what I did, you have to pay me for the job. But if you feel like just in any way, shape, and form you can't do your job or don't want to do it, just leave. And don't feel guilty about that. I hope that helps. If you need me to elaborate, I can, but I hope that helps you answer your question.
And I'd like to add, if you're in a situation and you keep getting compared to a previous worker, which has happened to me before, I've worked with directors who always use the same stage manager. They kind of take them with them, and then I'll step in and stage manage a show with them, and they'll be like, well, this isn't the way I've seen it done. At some point you have to step in and say, well, you hired me because I know what I'm doing. You hired me because you trust me. So take a chance, trust me. And if the way you do it gets a good result, the way you do it works, there's no reason that they should be opposed to it. And they continue to be opposed to it. And you guys can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but if you continue to be successful with your approach and they're opposed to your approach, don't let them see the approach. Do your job and be good at it.
Yeah, I was going to add on to that. I said to the person that he put his hands on me, you know, you hired me to do it this way. This person isn't here anymore. They're also just not confident in themselves. This person clearly wasn't confident in his show or himself or the new theater he was in. And I just was like, you put your hands on me, you put your face on my face, I'm out. Yeah. But just in that, if anyone has ever been in that situation of physical, where they physically felt unsafe like I did, leave. Do not hesitate for a second. It is unacceptable behavior.
Yeah, speaking
in any
a little
profession.
bit to what Fisher and Elizabeth both said, I've had one show that I didn't end up walking out, but I was very, 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 very close. It was the only time I truly said, okay, I might walk away from this show. And for me, at least, and I'm sure Erin can speak to this, having worked with me, if I am frustrated with somebody or there's something where I feel like my work is not being respected despite the fact that I'm doing a good job at it, I'll say it. I'm not one to hold back with those things. I'll say it professionally and politely, but I'll say it. And there was a point, I was working a festival and this person who was running the festival kept coming in and yelling and screaming about ridiculously strange things and also things that I wasn't doing. So no food or drink in the theater. Oh, one of your actors like left a Coke backstage. I'm like, I can't, go talk to them if you know who it is, you know? And at one point I very literally, he was getting very weird about how I was operating the board, even though I was operating it fine. And at one point I very literally stood up off my chair, stepped back and said, then you can do it. You can do my job. And that stopped him pretty quickly because he had never touched a board before in his life. And, you know, it's important to stand up for yourself in a professional manner, but make sure you are saying, okay, you know, you did hire me to do this job. I'm going to do it. If you have suggestion to do it better, I'll take that suggestion. But if you're just going to criticize me without giving any suggestions for improvement, then you're just wasting your time and wasting my time. And I think that's what it comes down to, is finding that balance between, okay, I'm not going to curse somebody out because that's unprofessional, but I'm going to make sure they know that the way they're treating me is not okay and that I'm a professional that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of those answers, Fisher and Elizabeth and Mckenzie. And thank you, Diane. I know you had a couple more questions. If we can't loop back around to them, I will direct those toward the Year of the Stage Manager 2020 group. So thank you. The next question is from Alex Norhold. And I'd love to direct this toward Yordis. So Alex, if you're still with us, if you would get on, yay. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Sorry. So yeah, my question was, because everybody's been talking about being the jack of all trades, which personally I love having multiple skills in different areas. I don't think I could just do one thing. But with you gaining skills in multiple areas, do you ever find that when people are offering you positions that they're looking for those other skills instead? For example, I'm a stage manager, but I have a lot of skill with lighting. So I will often get offers to be an associate lighting designer or just a lighting tech for basic things or something like that instead of SM work. And if you do, how you balance doing those other things that you might be skilled at and might be giving you the paycheck with what you actually want to do, being stage management. So.
Well, I think it's definitely a challenge, but as someone who, what I didn't mention was I started to make masks for theater at a certain point early on. And while I don't really do that much anymore, it's both a problem in the theater and a problem in the world, that if you have more than one skill set, you must be a master of none, right? So it's a tricky thing to juggle. I'm sometimes in situations where I'll work crew because I'd rather take that crew gig than some other side hustle But I try not to take like too many of them to then no longer be looked at as a stage manager. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be giving a totally satisfactory answer, because I think it's definitely something like that you sort of have to personally work out, you know. The fact is that if you're going to be doing an associate lighting position, it might be a really amazing opportunity at the right moment to talk about your stage management experience as well. You know, but again, finding the right moment to do that versus, you know, randomly or talking about it too much. I mean, to me, I feel like when I crew something, it makes me a better stage manager to manage a crew. So I think as long as you can feel like you mix it up in a way that is organic to you and that feels like is feeding into the main thing that you want to do, all the better. It's just going to make you a better in tech when you're, you know, in a very close relationship with the lighting designer and marking down your cue locations that you're, you know, you really know what that lighting person is where they're coming from. But again, I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and I think it's a challenge that there is no one right answer for. But that maybe choose those other things that you like to do that really could feed into the stage managing. I hope that helps.
It did. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have not a whole lot of time, but we have two more questions, and they're both directed at specific people. But I wanted to let the two people who haven't yet answered these questions get a crack at them. So the first question is, Diane had asked earlier, but I want to expand the question. How do you get people to take? I'm going to direct this toward Mel. How do you get people to take you seriously if you find, so Diane's question was specifically about being, I think about being younger, but when you find that people are different than you are, how do you command authority? How do you make sure that people are listening to you? And especially as you step back into the industry when you've been out for a little bit, because I'm hearing some other people say that as well. What do you do in those cases to make sure that people take you seriously?
Okay, so I literally never had most of these problems that other people are saying about being younger stuff, even though at 16, I was stage managing people that were old enough to be my parents, my grandparents. In fact, when I was 17, I literally stage managed my mother, which was really kind of weird. They said people realized the last name's the same, and they're like, what? So part of this, I think, had something to do with the fact, you know, my parents were both technicians. My dad was in broadcasting TV, and my mom was in broadcasting radio. So I kind of grew up in you know, a related industry. So, you know, because I came in knowing what everybody was doing when I eventually became a stage manager, I already knew. Sorry, my dog is sitting here going, "Where's my food?" You know, I already came in much more competent than you would have expected. So I never actually ever had a problem commanding the authority of when I was like doing my first professional job at 16, which is really scary. I never really had much of a problem. I had a little bit of a problem with other people my age because they thought I was an actor because it was very unusual to have such a young stage manager. And I wasn't even well, actually at the time I was still the youngest stage manager there. But I had a problem with like 2 people out of a cast of literally a couple of hundred. And then I said, dude, I'm actually your stage manager, not a colleague. Oh, and they didn't have that problem. But when I, you know, leaving and then coming back, because it was a big old gap, and coming in as an ASM for Annie in the fall, you know, it was kind of a little bit unusual. I was convinced I wasn't going to get any respect. I ended up with way more respect than the actual stage manager was, you know, had, because I was like, okay, because everything came back very, very quickly. And they would get to the point they'd completely ignore what Felicia said. or they would skip her entirely and just go to me. And I never had most of these problems that other people had, and I don't know why that is. I'm only 5'3", and I'm like, I'm really, really small. So if people wanted to ignore me, I'm very easy to do. The only times I've ever had any problems at all, people realize I'm not playing. So when they were talking about the hostility, I answered in chat. I'm very good at getting people fired, so they realize I'm not playing. I almost got an equity actor off their contract because they almost hit me with their car because they didn't like my attitude. My attitude being, can you please move your car backstage? Because Places is in 10 minutes. They almost hit me. Yeah, that was fun. So like I said, I never had that, and they realized the director had some words. Yeah, so I don't like stupidity, and I don't play with it, and I've never had a problem.
Thank you so much. The last question, this was a question originally based on something that Kate said, but I'd love to have Shannon answer this question because I think we can expand the question even. It's the question by Margaret. So Margaret, if you're still here, if you'd like to log in and ask your question, and then I'll expand upon it. Hi.
Hi. So it was a question, where is it in the chat? Hold on, finding it.
Related to taking on, when Kate talked about taking a job for a company that didn't have any pay.
Yeah, so just in terms of like taking jobs in general, I guess, if you want to work for a company that either isn't going to pay you initially or is going to pay you very little starting out, and then maybe it could grow to more, just sort of how do you judge taking a risk in terms of like taking a job, I guess, especially as someone who's younger starting out and wanting to get take as many jobs as possible to get out there, but I don't know, finding that balance, I guess. I don't know if that is coherent.
Yeah, that's really clear, and I just wanted to expand that slightly to add those of us who have side hustles where taking the stage management job means you cannot do your side hustle. What do you do? And I know, Shannon, you've dealt with this a lot. So, yeah.
I've got one too.
Yeah.
I've got answers for that one.
Yeah.
In my case, I own.
We're gonna let Shannon answer that, and then we can open up the floor a little bit. Thanks, Mel. Go ahead, Shannon.
Okay. So for me, my side job is a per diem job, and essentially that means they offer me hours and I can say yes or no. Now, obviously, I want the more hours I work, the more I make. So when I work on stage management contracts, it's like you were saying, I'm only 24. I've been out of college for less than 3 years, so I encounter this a lot. So do many of my friends in all the different areas of theater. It's kind of this catch-22. They want more experience on your resume in order to get more jobs, but in order to get more jobs, you feel like you have to accept the ones that aren't offering much pay. My biggest piece of advice, honestly, think about personally how much you want this job. It's up to you. Obviously, if they're asking you to work crazy hours, like 40 hours a week or more, and aren't going to pay you anything, I personally probably wouldn't take it. But if it's a job that you know for a fact is going to open up doors for yourself, and open up those networking events and have you meet people. And I worked for a company on Long Island. I worked on one show. It was supposed to be just like a per show basis, and I did it for next to nothing. I didn't think anything of it. But before I got a chance to turn it down, they said that they're having a new owner come in. So I took that job for next to nothing. New owner came in and they decided to hire me full time. Now that was like a risk I took. Again, every situation is different, so it's completely up to you. I understand wanting to put stuff on your resume and wanting to make money. Thankfully with my job as per diem, or even if you work, I was a dog walker for a little while there, and I got to just pick and choose where I got to work. So thankfully, I've had years that I worked 30 hours a week at my side gig, I guess. And I've had weeks that I worked maybe 2 hours or not at all. When I was working for a theater company last year full time, I wasn't making as much as I wanted to, and I wasn't able to make much for my side gig. And so it's kind of just weighing, like, is it worth it for you? Is it not worth it? Is there anything that's going to come of this? And like everyone else was saying, it depends on the gig. How important is this individual thing for you? I don't know if I answered your question or if I rambled a little bit too much. You let me know.
No, it's definitely good. Thanks.
That was great. And I'll have Michael and Mel, you can stay on, Margaret. I just want to wrap up for those people who need to leave. We'll just be on for another couple of minutes to address the comments that Michael and Mel have. I wanted to say thank you for being a part of this discussion and listening and being so attentive and patient. On behalf of all the stage managers in our panel, I want to just thank you. We will continue this conversation on Year of the Stage Manager. So if you're not a member yet, go on there and join. It's really wonderful. I also want to say that everyone here on the panel has, most people, if not all of them, have mentioned to me that this is, yes, Pat, absolutely. Has said that they don't need to be paid to be on a panel like this, but it's important to me as a producer that I'm offering something for people's time. So if you feel like you got some value out of this event and you can throw a couple dollars our way, we're going to be splitting 100% of what we bring in through donations with the panel. So the place you can do that is theseeingplace.org. That's theseeingplace.org. Everything that comes in by the end of tonight, by 11:59 p.m. Eastern time, we will split up amongst the group here. So thank you so much. Pat, why don't you go ahead and say what you wanted to say to wrap up?
Oh, I apologize. I know that you had some other things to deal with, but I just wanted to mention briefly that you know, I'm really, really committed to the kind of work that we're doing as stage managers and the kind of opportunities and new horizons. And for anyone out there who is union, I am running for, I currently hold a seat on the as a Western Stage Manager Counselor, and I would really love to keep my seat. There's some terrific stuff going on that I would like to finish, but also as those in Los Angeles know, our region has, Los Angeles itself is like a liaison city, even though it's also an office city. So to have people like Vernon Willett and myself at the table right now, while we're still creating bridges and trust, would be a real asset to the Western region. So I'm simply asking for people to consider that when they get their ballots.
Thank you, Pat. We appreciate it. So Mel,
Thank you for allowing me to say it.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Mel, you had something you wanted to share with Margaret.
Yeah, as we were talking about the side gigs, since most of my side gigs are, you know, I think I probably have more insanity as far as those side gigs. I actually own a private practice. When we're talking about how to manage that, I have to actually know things way in advance because I have to literally move clients around, do everything. Like I moved a couple of clients, actually one person canceled off so I could do this this panel. Every time I have to do these, I love theater, but it's like trying to deal with when I wish I had a per diem situation, but none of my things are. And it ends up being, you really have to decide whether you love it or not. I mean, 1 hour of my therapy that I do is basically the equivalent. It's really, really close to what I was paid the last time I was an ASM. I was paid $200. I charge $150 cash to do this. But everything comes down to, what you love and what you can do. I'm lucky that in my private practice, I'm my own boss. My EMS job, I basically have to give that up as much as I can or try my best to move it because I do that because I want to, not because I need the money, because I want to. But it becomes very problematic when I have to deal with the theater too. But what's your priority? Like, 90% of the time, I'd rather do the show. And they don't have to even pay me because I've gotten another job. So that's it. So.
Yeah. All right. So Michael and then Elizabeth, you both had things you wanted to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump off what Shannon was saying as one thing in terms of what she was talking about in terms of deciding what the gig might have to, what the job might have to offer. Something that to me is a very difficult lesson to learn that you learn as you go along. No gig actually can promise you anything. There is no guarantee of moving on or any future of any gig. This is very well known, or it becomes more apparent as you jump into actually equity contracts and the idea of like, you might be offered something that everyone's talking about going to Broadway, and then all of a sudden you not only get bought out or it doesn't go or anything of that nature. So I think it's just, I'm not disagreeing at all. Everything Shannon was saying 100%. I think it's just important to relay that knowledge that I've had throughout my career in the fact that I really have to learn the fact that somebody could say, oh, this is going places. Don't use that as gospel to make your decision. There's a chance it will, yes. There's also a giant chance it won't. As a quick anecdote, I was working an off-Broadway show in New York City with a company in which they had a producer who was going to make it a commercial off-Broadway production. Literally overnight, that possibility got canceled. We were still in the midst of our mini run, and that just literally because of a disagreement between the director and that producer just went away overnight. That, as well as many other types of examples, are reasons to use the possibility of something as a reason, but just don't use it as your only one, would be my personal advice.
And Elizabeth, you had a follow-up as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you are volunteering your time or you're doing a job where you know the money isn't as good as you'd like it to be, still give it 110%. Read your contracts, read what the bullet points of the job are, because I have worked with so many people who I've hired for readings or production assistants. Like, I'm comfortable doing if you can only pay me this, or that company can only pay me that, or I have to do it for free. And I'm like, okay. And then they just completely slack off, and I will not forget that. So do your job if you're being paid thousands of dollars a week or zero. And like Michael said, nothing is a guarantee. So whether they say, oh, this is definitely going to go to Broadway or off Broadway or tour for a year, it might not. It probably won't. But just be there for the production. Do whatever job you have to do. Be flexible in the moment. If you're not comfortable with something because of safety, speak up. If you think you can do it, even if it is a reach, do it, because you're going to add a skill to your resume. I'm a big advocate for the special skills section. Some people are saying, oh, I'm really good at lights and ideas. I do lights and sound for, lights and stage management for a one-woman show for over a year now that has gone many places, including the Kennedy Center, because I can do both of those disciplines. So don't be afraid to speak up. And if you aren't comfortable with something, don't lie about it on your resume either, because people have come to me and said, oh, I can totally run QLab. And I'm like, you definitely can't. But also teach yourself. I taught myself how to use Final Draft, if you're familiar with that program, in the Denver airport on a layover. It is not, or QLab, you can easily teach yourself through YouTube, or just ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to people and ask questions. Your mentors, your teachers, your parents, your friends, people you know who work in this business. Just be confident, speak up, and just do the best job you can. That's all I was going to add to that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret. And I want to just go ahead. We're 12 minutes over the time that we had allotted for this. So I want to thank you for your flexibility.